The moment I asked that question, "So, did you help my mom well? Then why do your faces look like that?" The air in our living room went completely still, like someone had pressed a pause button on the universe. My husband Brandon stood in the hallway, his hand still on the bathroom door handle, his face the color of old ash. His mother Karen was clutching my mother's bag against her chest like it was a life preserver. And my mother Linda, 63 years old, diabetic, recovering from a minor stroke she'd had just 4 weeks earlier, was standing behind them both, leaning against the wall, her eyes wet and confused. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not a dramatic person. I don't yell. I don't throw things. I have never in my life made a scene at a family dinner or sent a passive-aggressive text. I'm the woman who apologizes when someone bumps into me at the grocery store. My whole life, I've been the calm one, the reasonable one, the one who says, "Let's talk about this," instead of, "Get out of my house." But standing in that living room, watching Karen slowly lower my mother's handbag, watching her fingers unclench from the leather strap one by one, something in me went very, very quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that comes right before something breaks. And Brandon's answer, when he finally opened his mouth, was worse than anything I had been prepared for. But let me back up, because none of this happened in a vacuum, and you need to understand the world I was living in before everything fell apart. I met Brandon Mitchell at a work happy hour in the fall of 2018. I was 31, working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized marketing firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was 34, tall, broad-shouldered, with this easy laugh that made the whole bar seem warmer. We were introduced through a mutual colleague, and within 20 minutes, we were in a corner booth talking about road trips and whether Chicago deep dish actually counts as pizza. He was funny. He was present. He looked at me like I was saying something worth listening to, which, after a string of guys who check their phones every 4 minutes, felt like a revelation. We dated for 2 years. I met his mother Karen about 3 months in. She lived 40 minutes away in Concord, a retirement-age woman with a well-maintained townhouse, a small dog named Biscuit, and strong opinions about everything from interior decorating to the correct way to load a dishwasher. She was intense. I noticed that immediately, but Brandon always laughed it off. "She's just old school," he told me on the drive home after our first dinner together. "She grew up with nothing. It made her protective of what she has, protective of me. You'll get used to it." I nodded. I filed it under quirky family dynamics and moved on. We got married in October 2020. Small ceremony, backyard, 30 people max because of COVID restrictions. My mother Linda flew in from Ohio, where she'd been living alone since my dad passed in 2015. She wore a blue dress and cried happy tears during the vows and danced with Brandon's Uncle Terrence until her feet hurt. It was the best day. It genuinely was. We bought a house in a quiet suburb outside Charlotte the following spring, a 3-bedroom colonial on a cul-de-sac with good schools and an HOA that mostly left us alone as long as we kept the grass cut. Brandon worked in logistics management, pulling in around $87,000 a year. I was making $64,000. Together, we were comfortable. Not rich, but solid. We had a joint account for household expenses, separate accounts for personal spending, a shared 401k strategy we'd mapped out with a financial planner, and, this matters, a clear agreement that what was mine and what was his until we decided together to mix it. My mother was the heart of my world. I need you to understand that. She was the person I called every single morning on my commute. She was the woman who drove 8 hours in a snowstorm to sit with me when I had a miscarriage in 2021, something we never talked about with Brandon's family, something that was ours. She was sharp, funny, a little stubborn, the kind of woman who kept a handwritten recipe book and still sent birthday cards through the mail. When she had her stroke in August of last year, minor, the doctor said, but strokes are never really minor, are they? I flew to Ohio and spent 2 weeks with her. Brandon came for the first weekend. He sat with her, brought her flowers, held her hand. He seemed genuinely concerned. When I told him I wanted her to come stay with us for a while so I could keep an eye on her, he agreed without hesitation. "Of course," he said. "She's your mom. She should be here." I almost cried from relief. I thought, I married a good man. She arrived on a Tuesday in September, a single rolling suitcase, her blood pressure medication in a little zippered pouch, and a casserole dish she'd brought because she insisted on cooking for us at least once a week. She settled into our third bedroom, which I'd spent a weekend repainting in a soft sage green because she'd once mentioned she found the color calming. For 3 weeks, things were fine. Better than fine. Mom was getting stronger. She was sleeping well, eating well. She and I would sit on the back porch with coffee every morning, and sometimes Brandon would join us, and it felt, I don't know, it felt like something whole. But Karen had not yet come to visit. And the first time she did, something shifted. I couldn't name it right then. It was small, almost nothing. A look between Brandon and his mother when my mom excused herself to use the restroom. A look I caught from across the kitchen. Quick, private, gone in a second. Brandon saw me notice it. He smiled and refilled his coffee. "Mom's just adjusting," he said, before I'd asked a single question. I let it go. I should not have let it go. Karen came back the following Saturday. I remember the exact time, 11:14 in the morning, because I was standing in the kitchen watching the coffee finish brewing, and I glanced at the microwave clock when I heard Brandon's car pull into the driveway. He hadn't mentioned she was coming. He told me he was going to run some errands, Home Depot, maybe a car wash, and I'd nodded and poured myself a second cup and figured I'd spend the morning with my mom on the back porch. Instead, there was Karen. She walked in carrying a foil-covered dish of something that smelled like cinnamon and apples, wearing that particular smile she reserved for occasions when she wanted you to feel like she was doing you a favor. Big, warm, slightly too wide. The kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "I made a coffee cake," she announced, handing it to me without actually looking at me. Her gaze had already moved past my shoulder toward the hallway. "Where's Linda? I thought we could all sit together." "She's resting," I said. "She had a rough night." "Oh, she can rest later." Karen was already unzipping her jacket. "I drove 40 minutes. She'll want to see me." I want to pause here and tell you something about Karen that I had spent 2 years rationalizing away. She wasn't cruel in obvious ways. She never said anything outright mean about my mother. She never insulted me directly to my face. What she did was something more slippery, something that left you questioning whether you'd actually seen what you thought you'd seen. She would make a comment, then laugh and say she was joking. She would ask a question that wasn't really a question. She would walk into a room and rearrange the energy of it without touching a single thing. My mother, Linda, was the opposite of Karen in almost every way. Mom was quiet warmth. She asked how you were doing and actually listened to the answer. She didn't compete. She didn't take up space that wasn't offered to her. She'd been living in our guest room for 3 weeks and had already apologized twice for being underfoot, even though she was the least underfoot person I had ever met. So, when Karen settled herself at my kitchen table like she owned it, I watched Brandon carefully. And I noticed, the way you notice something you've been trying not to notice, that he stood just slightly behind his mother. Not beside me, behind her. My mom came out of the bedroom 20 minutes later, moving slowly, her hand trailing along the wall for balance, the way she'd been doing since the stroke. She was wearing her soft blue cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, and she smiled when she saw the kitchen full of people. "Karen," she said, "what a nice surprise." "Linda!" Karen stood up and went in for a hug that my mother had no choice but to accept. "You look so much better than I expected." The way she said it, better than I expected, landed somewhere between a compliment and a verdict. My mom blinked and said thank you and sat down carefully in the chair I pulled out for her. We had coffee. We had the coffee cake, which was actually good, though I resented enjoying it. Karen talked about Biscuit the dog and her HOA drama and a neighbor who'd let their yard go to seed. My mom smiled and nodded and contributed the occasional gentle comment. I watched Brandon, who laughed at his mother's jokes and refilled everyone's coffee and seemed genuinely, completely at ease. And then Karen said it. "Linda, I have to ask, are you managing okay? Financially, I mean, with everything that happened." The table went quiet, not dramatically, just a small, significant pause. My mom looked up. "I'm doing fine, thank you." "Because a stroke is expensive," Karen continued, her voice all soft concern. "And I know you're on a fixed income, and I know Ashley's been carrying a lot of the burden here." "Karen," I said at once, quietly. She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes. "I'm just asking, honey. I care about Linda. I want to make sure she's not a—" A tiny pause. "A strain." I felt Brandon's hand land on my shoulder. Not the reassuring kind of touch, the kind that means don't. "Mom's covered," I said, keeping my voice even. "She has her own savings. She has Medicare. She's not a strain on anything." Karen smiled and picked up her fork. "Of course, I just worry." Later, after Karen left and my mom had gone back to lie down, I found Brandon in the garage reorganizing his tool shelf, something he did when he didn't want to have a conversation. "She shouldn't have said that," I told him. "She was just asking." He didn't turn around. "She was implying that my mother is a financial burden in our home. That's not just asking." He set down a wrench and turned. His expression was patient in that particular way that always made me feel like I was overreacting. "Ashley, my mom cares about us. She worries about money because she grew up with nothing. You know this." "I know it. That doesn't make it okay." "She didn't mean anything by it." "How do you know what she meant?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I know my mother." And that was the end of it. Or rather, that was the end of him being willing to discuss it. I stood in the garage doorway for another few seconds, and then I went inside, and I told myself it was one comment, one awkward question from a woman who had never learned boundaries, and that I could survive it. What I didn't know then, what I had absolutely no way of knowing, was that while we'd been having coffee and cake at the kitchen table, Karen had been watching my mother. Not in the way guests watch people. In the way someone watches something they're trying to assess. I would only understand this later, in retrospect, with the sick clarity that hindsight provides. The second visit happened the following Thursday. I was at work. This is the part I have to sit with even now. I was at work, in a meeting about Q4 deliverables, while my mother was home alone with Karen, who had called Brandon and arranged to come over, and Brandon had let her in without telling me. My mom texted me at 2:47 p.m. The text said, "Karen stopped by. Everything is fine. She brought soup." I texted back, "Did Brandon know she was coming?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I think so." I excused myself from the meeting. I called Brandon. He picked up on the second ring, which he almost never did. "Why is your mother at our house without telling me?" I asked. "She wanted to check on Linda. I didn't think it was a big deal." "She's in our house with my sick mother, and you didn't think I needed to know?" "Ashley." "Brandon." A pause. "She's fine. Your mom is fine. Karen just wanted to help." I drove home 40 minutes later to find Karen gone and my mom in the kitchen, standing at the stove making herself tea, looking perfectly normal. When I asked her about the visit, she shrugged it off the way she always did. My mother had this deep, practiced habit of minimizing things that had unsettled her, a habit she'd developed over 60 years of being a woman who didn't want to cause trouble. "We just talked," she said. "She asked me about Ohio, about your father, about—" She paused. "About my pension." I set down my keys very carefully on the counter. "She asked about your pension." "She was just curious." Mom wrapped both hands around her mug. "She asked how much it was. I didn't tell her the exact number. I just said enough." That night, I waited until my mom was asleep, and I sat across from Brandon at the kitchen table with the lights low, and I said, very calmly, "Your mother asked my mom about her pension." Brandon was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's just nosy. You know how she is." Nosy is asking what her favorite TV show is. Asking about her pension is something else. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your mother is taking an unusual interest in my mother's finances." Brandon leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Something shifted in his face. Not anger, exactly. Something more careful. Managed. "You're reading into it." "Am I?" "Yes." He held my gaze. "Ashley, my mom grew up poor. Money is how she shows she cares. She's probably just trying to figure out if Linda needs help. That's it." I wanted to believe him. I really, genuinely wanted to believe him. He said it with such calm certainty, such reasonable husband energy, that I almost let it land. I almost nodded and went to bed and let it go again. But there was something behind his eyes that night. Something I couldn't name yet. A flatness, like a door that had been quietly, carefully closed, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. I said goodnight. I went to bed. I lay in the dark and I listened to the house settle around me, and I thought about the look he and Karen had exchanged that first dinner, the one he'd explained away before I'd asked. I thought about how he'd said, "I know my mother," like it was supposed to reassure me. I thought about my mom's hands wrapped around her mug, and the careful way she'd said, "Enough." I didn't sleep well, and I should have trusted that instinct, that low, persistent hum of wrongness, a lot sooner than I did. Because 3 days later, I came home from work early with a migraine, and I heard the lock click on the bathroom door. 3 days later, I came home from work early with a migraine, and I heard the lock click on the bathroom door. I stood in the entryway, my keys still in my hand, my work bag sliding off my shoulder. The house smelled like Karen's perfume, that heavy, floral cloud she wore, the kind that clung to upholstery for hours. Which meant she'd been here, which meant Brandon had let her in again without telling me. The hallway was empty. The living room was empty. But from the back of the house, behind the closed bathroom door, I could hear something. Not voices, not exactly. More like the particular silence of people trying not to make noise. The kind of silence that has shape to it. I set my bag down on the floor without letting it drop. I walked to the hallway. And I stood there, outside that door, and I listened. A rustling. The sound of something, fabric or paper, being moved. A low murmur from Karen that I couldn't make out. And then, faint and unmistakable, the sound of a zipper. My mother's bag had a very specific zipper. It was an older purse, a deep burgundy leather tote she'd had for years, and the zipper had a slightly stiff pull that made a particular sound. I had heard that sound 1,000 times. I would know it anywhere. I stepped back. I made myself breathe. I thought, "You are misunderstanding this. There is a reasonable explanation." I thought about what Brandon would say. "You're reading into it." And I tried to hold on to that. I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt. Then I heard my mother's voice, thin and uncertain, say, "I don't think you should—" And Karen's voice, low and smooth, cut her off. "Linda, honey, I'm just trying to help. Let me see." I walked into the hallway. I knocked on the bathroom door. Not hard, but deliberate. "Mom, you okay in there?" A pause. A beat too long. "Fine, sweetheart." Her voice was careful, held together with effort. "We'll be out in a minute." I said, "Okay." And I walked into the kitchen, and I stood at the counter, and I waited. My migraine had dissolved completely. I couldn't feel it anymore. What I felt instead was something colder and more focused than pain. Brandon came in from the garage 2 minutes later, brushing sawdust off his hands. He saw my face and stopped. "You're home early," he said. "I have a migraine." "Oh." He moved to the cabinet, reached for a glass. "Do you want some Advil?" "Your mother is in the bathroom with my mother." He turned on the faucet. "Yeah, she stopped by. She wanted to visit." "Brandon." I waited until he looked at me. "She is in a locked bathroom with my mother. I heard my mother tell her to stop. I heard a zipper. Something moved across his face. Not surprise. That was the thing. It was not surprise. It was more like a calculation, quick and invisible, gone almost before it registered. He set the glass down and turned fully toward me. "Ashley," he said, and his voice was the patient voice, the reasonable husband voice. "My mom is probably just helping her with something. You know how she is. She sees someone who needs help and she locked the door. It probably just swung shut. Bathroom doors in this house do not swing shut and lock themselves." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the hallway. And that was when the bathroom door opened. They came out together, Karen first, my mother just behind her, one hand on the doorframe. Karen's face was composed, that wide smile already assembled, but her hands were wrong. She was holding my mother's bag, the burgundy tote, pressed against her chest, both arms wrapped around it, and her knuckles were white. My mother's eyes found mine immediately. She looked the way she'd looked in the hospital after the stroke, that particular combination of frightened and ashamed that broke me every time I saw it. She looked like she wanted to apologize for something that wasn't her fault. I looked at Karen. I looked at the bag. I looked at Brandon, who was standing very still near the counter. And then I heard myself say it, calm and even. "So, did you help my mom well? Then why do your faces look like that?" The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. 4 of the longest seconds of my life. Karen's smile flickered, held. She lowered the bag, slowly, like she was demonstrating that there was nothing wrong with the fact that she had it, and set it on the hallway table. "Ashley, I was just—" "Brandon." I didn't look at her. I looked at my husband. "What is going on?" He shifted his weight, and then he said it. The thing that was worse than anything I had been prepared for. "She was checking to see if your mom had enough money to cover her own expenses," he said. "Because we've been talking, me and my mom, and we think it's time to have a real conversation about whether having Linda here is something we can actually afford long-term." I heard my mother make a small sound. A tiny, involuntary sound, like someone had pressed on a bruise. "You've been talking," I repeated. "It's not an attack, Ashley. It's practical. Your mom's been here for weeks, and the grocery bill alone— She brings a casserole every Thursday, and she hasn't cost us a single dollar that I haven't chosen to spend." "That's not entirely accurate." He said it carefully. Too carefully. "There's the utilities, the space, the— She is my mother. She had a stroke. She is staying in our home." "I know that. I just think we should have a plan, a timeline." I looked at Karen, who was watching this exchange with her hands folded in front of her and her face arranged into something that was supposed to look like regret, but felt like satisfaction. I looked at the bag on the table. I thought about the zipper sound, about the white knuckles. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I asked her directly. Her chin came up. I was trying to understand the situation. "In my mother's purse, in my locked bathroom, without her consent." "Linda didn't object." "I heard her tell you to stop." My voice didn't shake. I was genuinely surprised by how steady it was. "I was standing outside that door." Karen looked at Brandon. That look, that particular relay of information, that shorthand between them. I had been watching it for months, and finally, I understood what it meant. It wasn't a mother and son checking in with each other. It was a team. It had always been a team, and I had never been on it. My mother touched my arm. "Ashley, it's all right." "It is not all right, Mom." I said it gently, but I said it. "You don't have to protect anyone right now." She was quiet. Her hand stayed on my arm. I picked up her bag from the hallway table. I checked it without looking at Karen, opened the main zipper, glanced inside. Her wallet was there, her blood pressure medication, her little zippered pouch. I couldn't tell if anything had been disturbed. I didn't know what Karen had been looking for. Cash? A bank statement? Her Medicare card? Her whole financial picture, itemized and assessed? I zipped it closed and handed it to my mother. Go sit down, okay? I'll be right there. She went. Slowly, one hand on the wall, the pearl buttons on her blue cardigan catching the hallway light. She didn't look back. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close softly. Then I turned to Brandon. I need you to take your mother home, I said. Now. Tonight.
Ashley, you're overreacting.
I am giving you a direct, calm request. Please take your mother home. Karen made a small noise, something between a scoff and a sigh, and reached for her jacket on the hook by the door. I can see I'm not welcome here. You went through my mother's belongings while she was locked in a bathroom and couldn't leave, I said. You are correct that you are not welcome here right now. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Brandon. He looked at me. His face had gone through several things in the last 5 minutes. Surprise, calculation, defensiveness, and now something I recognized as the expression he wore when he knew he was wrong and had decided to be stubborn about it anyway. We'll talk about this later, he said. Yes, I agreed. We will. He took Karen out through the garage. I heard his car back out of the driveway. I stood in the kitchen and I breathed for a moment. Just breathed. And then I went to my mother's room and knocked lightly and pushed the door open. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her bag in her lap, her hands folded over it. Her eyes were dry, but barely. How much did she see? I asked, sitting down beside her. Mom was quiet for a moment. Then, she found the envelope. My stomach dropped. What envelope? I keep cash, Ashley. She said it quietly, without embarrassment, but with a kind of tired dignity. I always have. Your father and I, we always kept some cash in the house. It's an old habit. I have an envelope in my bag, just in case. How much? $800. I closed my eyes. $800. My 63-year-old mother, recovering from a stroke, keeping $800 in an envelope in her purse out of a lifetime habit, and Karen had found it. Did she take any of it? No. A pause. I don't think so. I stopped her before she could. I tried to stop her, but she'd already seen it. She'd already counted it. I sat with that for a long moment. The image of Karen's hands in my mother's bag, counting bills, while my mother stood there sick and unsteady and trying to say stop. That image was going to live in me for a very long time. Okay, I said finally. Ashley. Mom, listen to me. I took her hand. You did nothing wrong, you hear me? Not one single thing. She nodded, but I could see in her face that she was already working on the apology, already constructing the version of events where she'd somehow caused this. 60 years of being a woman who didn't want to cause trouble. I sat with her until she fell asleep. Then I went to the kitchen and I poured myself a glass of water, and I stood at the window and I looked at the cul-de-sac in the dark, and I made a decision. I was done trying to understand Karen. I was done waiting for Brandon to choose a side. I was done being the calm one, the reasonable one, the woman who let things go. I went to my laptop. I opened a new browser tab, and I typed 3 words into the search bar that I should have typed 2 months earlier. Divorce attorney Charlotte N.C. The results loaded. I stared at them. My hands were completely steady. I clicked on the first link, and then the second, and then I found a woman named Patricia Holt, family law specialist, 4.9 stars, over 200 reviews, and I read her bio and I thought, this is where it starts. I had an appointment scheduled by 11 p.m., a consultation the following Thursday at 9 a.m. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. Brandon came home sometime after midnight. I heard the garage door, heard his footsteps in the kitchen, heard him pause outside our bedroom door for a long moment before moving down the hall to the couch. I lay in the dark and thought about $800 in an envelope. I thought about my mother's voice saying, I don't think you should. I thought about the way Brandon had said we've been talking, me and my mom, like I wasn't a person who needed to be included in conversations about my own home, my own mother, my own life. And I thought about Patricia Holt, family law specialist, and the appointment I had made in the quiet of my kitchen at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I didn't know yet what I was going to find out. I didn't know yet how much deeper this went. But for the first time in months, I wasn't lying there waiting for something to happen. I was the one deciding what happened next. The Thursday morning of my appointment with Patricia Holt, I woke up at 5:47 a.m. before my alarm. I lay still for a moment, listening to the house. Brandon was asleep down the hall. He'd been on the couch for 3 nights now, and neither of us had acknowledged the arrangement out loud. We'd been moving around each other like two people sharing a waiting room, polite and careful and completely separate. I showered, dressed, made coffee. I checked on my mom, who was still asleep, her breathing slow and even, her blue cardigan folded over the chair in the corner. I stood in her doorway for a moment and watched her sleep, and made myself a silent promise. Patricia Holt's office was in a glass and brick building in uptown Charlotte, 14th floor, with a view of the skyline that felt slightly surreal for a conversation about the dissolution of my marriage. She was a small black woman in her early 50s, precise and warm at the same time, the kind of person who made you feel like your situation was both serious and survivable. I told her everything. All of it. The visits, the questions about the pension, the locked bathroom, the $800 in the envelope, the way Brandon had said we've been talking. Me and my mom, like I was a variable in someone else's equation. I told her about the look they exchanged across the kitchen. I told her about how he'd slept on the couch without either of us naming it. She listened without interrupting. She took notes in a small leather notebook. When I finished, she looked up and said, "Has he ever had access to your mother's financial accounts? Her bank cards, her Medicare information, her Social Security number?" The question hit me somewhere cold. "Not that I know of." "Has Karen been alone with your mother at any point before this incident?" I thought about it. The second visit. I was at work. Karen came over while I was gone. My mom texted me. She said Karen brought soup and they talked. Patricia wrote something down. About her pension. "Yes."
Ashley, I want to be direct with you.
She set her pen down. "What you're describing, the pattern of visits, the financial questioning, the physical search of your mother's bag, this isn't just bad behavior from a difficult mother-in-law. This is a pattern of targeting a vulnerable person. Your mother is 63. She's a stroke survivor. She's in an unfamiliar environment. She's exactly the kind of person that financial predators, and I use that word carefully, look for." I heard the word predators, and something in my chest went very still. "Are you saying Brandon is?" "I'm saying I don't know what Brandon is yet, but I'm saying you should find out. And I'm saying your mother should not be alone in that house with either of them again until you do." I drove home with Patricia Holt's consultation summary in my bag and a list of 3 things she'd told me to do immediately. Document everything I remembered with dates and times. Change the locks on anything that could be changed. And talk to my mother about whether Karen had asked her to sign anything at all, during those visits. That last one. I hadn't even thought of that. Mom was in the kitchen when I got home, making her tea. Brandon's car was gone. He'd left for work. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, and I put my hands flat on the surface, and I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if you think it'll upset me." She set down her mug. "Okay." "During any of Karen's visits, any of them, did she ask you to sign something? A form, a document, anything with your name on it?" My mother's face did something complicated. A sequence of expressions that moved too fast for me to catch them all. And then she said, quietly, "She had a piece of paper." The kitchen went very loud with silence. "She said it was a financial assistance form," my mom said. "She said it was something Brandon had set up, in case I needed help with medical bills. She said it would let them access my Medicare account to advocate on my behalf if something happened." I couldn't speak for a moment. "Did you sign it?" I started to. She looked at her hands. She had a pen ready, but I don't know, something felt wrong. I said I wanted to read it first, and she said it was just standard language, and I said I still wanted to read it, and she got quiet. The kind of quiet that's not really quiet. She paused. I didn't sign it. I put the pen down and I said I needed to talk to you first. When was this? The Thursday visit, while you were at work. That was the second visit. The one where they'd talked about her pension. The one where Karen had brought soup. I thought about a woman showing up with soup and a document and a pen, and my 63-year-old mother, 4 weeks out of a stroke, sitting across from her and feeling something wrong without being able to name it, and saying, I want to read it first. And I thought, that right there, that stubbornness, that small act of self-preservation, that saved her. Mom! I reached across and took her hands. You did exactly right. Do you hear me? I should have told you sooner. Yes, I said honestly, but you told me now, and that's what matters. I called Patricia Holt from the back porch while my mom made lunch. I told her about the document. There was a pause on the line, and then Patricia said, That changes things significantly. That's not a mother-in-law being nosy. That's an attempted unauthorized access to a vulnerable adult's financial accounts, potentially elder financial abuse under North Carolina statute. I need you to get your mother to write down everything she remembers about that document. The language, the layout, what Karen said about it, everything. Okay. And Ashley, does your husband know about this consultation? No. Keep it that way for now. I went back inside. I sat with my mother for 2 hours while she told me everything she remembered, and I typed it all into a document on my laptop, time-stamped, and emailed it to Patricia. Then I called my cousin Rachel in Raleigh, who had a spare room and had been asking my mom to visit for months, and I explained the situation in broad strokes, and Rachel said, Get her here, today if you can. I packed my mother's rolling suitcase myself while she sat on the bed and watched me. Her blood pressure medication, her pearl button cardigan, the casserole dish she'd brought from Ohio. I carried it to my car. I drove her to Raleigh that afternoon, 4 hours round trip, and I held her hand in the parking lot of Rachel's apartment complex, and I said, This is temporary. I just need you somewhere safe while I handle this. I know, she said. She touched my face the way she used to when I was small. You be careful, Ashley. I will. He seemed like a good man. I know he did. She went inside. I drove back to Charlotte alone, and somewhere around exit 49 on I-85, I started crying. Not the dramatic kind, just the quiet, exhausted kind, the kind that doesn't ask for anything, just needs to come out. I cried for about 12 miles. Then I stopped. Brandon came home that evening to a house that was quieter than he expected. He stood in the hallway and looked toward the guest room and then looked at me. Where's your mom? She's with Rachel in Raleigh. Something moved in his face. Relief, I thought. He tried to hide it and didn't quite manage. Is she okay? She's fine. I was standing in the kitchen, completely still. Brandon, I need to show you something. I had printed out the notes I'd sent to Patricia. Not all of them, just the part about the document. The financial assistance form, the pen that had been ready. I set the papers on the kitchen table. He looked down at them. I don't know what that is, he said. Your mother brought a document to our house while I was at work and asked my mother to sign something that would give access to her Medicare account. My mother didn't sign it, but she almost did. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, You don't know what that document was. You're right, I don't. Do you? He looked up. His face was doing that careful, managed thing again, the door that had been quietly closed. But there was something else in it now, something that looked almost like relief that I'd finally found it, mixed with something that looked almost like fear. My mom was trying to help, he said. With a document she brought without telling me, while I was at work, asking a stroke survivor to sign something that would give financial account access. I kept my voice even. Brandon, if that document was legitimate, why didn't she tell me about it? Why didn't you? He sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. He put his elbows on the table. He didn't answer. How long has she been planning this? I asked. It's It wasn't a plan, Ashley. How long has your mother been trying to get access to my mother's money? He rubbed his face with both hands. And then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, "She owes money. My mom. She took out a loan last year against her townhouse, and she's behind on it. She's been asking me to help her, and I don't have the liquidity, and she got this idea that Linda had savings and that maybe—" He stopped. He couldn't finish it. But he didn't have to.
She thought my sick mother would be easier to access than asking me directly, I said.
And you knew. I didn't know about the document. I swear to you, I didn't know about the document. But you knew she was looking. You knew she was assessing. That's what the visits were. That's what the questions about the pension were. You knew, and you let her in anyway. He looked at me across the kitchen table. Across our kitchen table, in our house, in the life we'd built, and he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with something exhausted and ashamed in his face, and he said, I thought if she understood that Linda didn't have enough to make a difference, she'd let it go. So you let your mother audit my mother's purse to make her go away." He flinched. "I didn't tell her to lock the door. But you didn't stop her either." Silence. I picked up the papers from the table. I held them for a moment. Then I said, "I have an attorney. Her name is Patricia Holt. She's very good. I'd suggest you get one too." His head came up. "Ashley." "I'm not doing this out of anger," I said, and I meant it. "I'm doing this because there is no version of our marriage where what happened in that bathroom is something I can move past. You chose your mother over my mother. You chose her enough to let her in our house while I was working, enough to let her question a sick woman about her finances, enough to say nothing when you found out about a document. You chose her, Brandon, and I choose my mom." He didn't say anything. I walked down the hall to our bedroom, my bedroom, and I closed the door. The divorce took 8 months. It was not a pleasant 8 months, but it was not a war either. Brandon didn't contest much. I think some part of him knew, as clearly as I did, that there was nothing to save. We divided the house equity cleanly. It had appreciated $47,000 since we bought it, and we split that down the middle. I kept my 401k. He kept his. We closed the joint account and settled the balance. Karen was never formally charged with anything. Patricia consulted with a colleague who specialized in elder financial abuse, and the consensus was that because my mother hadn't signed the document and nothing had been taken, the evidentiary threshold for a criminal complaint was too high to meet. What we did instead was file a formal complaint with the County Adult Protective Services Office, documenting the pattern of behavior, the visits, the financial questioning, the document, the locked bathroom. It went into a file. It wasn't nothing. Brandon called me once, 3 months after I moved out of the house, on a Sunday evening. He said, "I'm sorry." Just those 2 words. I sat with them for a moment and I said, "I believe you." And then I said, "It wasn't enough." And I hung up. My mother is still at Rachel's in Raleigh. She loves it there. Rachel has a little porch garden, and the 2 of them grow tomatoes together in the summer. Mom's blood pressure is better than it's been in years. She still keeps an envelope of cash in her bag. $800 every time. I know because I've stopped asking her not to. It's her money, it's her habit, and it kept her paying attention when it mattered most. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Charlotte now, 3rd floor, with a view of a parking lot that I have come to find genuinely peaceful. I call my mother every morning on my commute, same as always. Sometimes she puts Rachel on, and the 3 of us talk for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, and I think about how that nothing is actually everything. There's a photograph on my kitchen counter, just a small print I made at the drugstore, nothing fancy. It's from that first month she stayed with us, before everything went wrong. We're on the back porch, both of us holding coffee cups, squinting a little in the morning light. She's wearing her blue cardigan with the pearl buttons. I'm laughing at something she said, though I can't remember what it was now. I look at it sometimes when I'm making dinner, and I think, I almost let someone take this from her. I almost let someone count her bills and assess her value, and decide she was a problem to be solved. I almost let it happen because I wanted to believe that the man I married was the man I thought he was, and because I had spent my whole life being the woman who lets things go. But I didn't let it go. Not when it mattered. And that, more than the apartment, more than the divorce decree, more than Patricia Holt's file with all its careful documentation, that is the thing I hold on to. My mother is safe. I made sure of it. That's the whole story.